Radha Nila Madhav, Radha Nila Madhav Radhe. Jaya Radha Nila Madhav, Radha Nila Madhav Radhe. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev.
Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Hastatatar Shata Shishimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Hastatatar Shata Shishimad Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Nam Acharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Founder Acharya of Iskcon Srila Prabhupada Ki Iskcon Guru Vrinda Ki Prem Shiko Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shiva Shadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Shri Mayapur Navadip Dham Ki Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Shri Radhanila Madhava Dham Ki Bhakti Devi Ki Himara Devi Ki Ganga Mai Ki Srimati Tulsi Maharani Ki Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki, the most merciful Lordship Shri Shri Nitai Chaitanya Chandra Nitai Gaur Chandra Ki, Shri Shri Giriraj Govardhan Ki, Shri Shri Radha Giridhari Ki, and the most beautiful Lordship Shri Shri Radhanila Madhava Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga.
It's a parents of Tamal Krishna Maharaj Ki Jai.
Jai. Jaya Nilo Premadana Karuna Patu Nilo Jaya Nilo Premadana Karuna Patu Eno Prabhu Gota Gila Jaya Thakur Gota Gila Jaya Thakur Amora Sarvabhauma Radha Sarvabhauma Patita Kahamora Bhakta Yuga Kahakaliya Eka Kali Kota Gela Goranata Kali Kota Gela Goranata Vasane Kutivo Mata Anale Kashibo Goranga Gunera Nidhi Kota Gele Prabhu Nidhi Kota Gele Prabhu Sesamar Sangira Sangere Dekoyo Vila Sesava Sangira Sange Ekoyo Vira Ekoyo Vira Sesangana Paya Kande Sangana Paya Kande Jaya Vaishnav Thakur, Jaya Vaishnav Thakur, Vaishnav Thakur, Jaya Vaishnav Thakur, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Jaya Vishnupan Paramahansa Parivajrakacharya Astatatar Shata Shri Shriman's Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Most transcendental disappearance day of His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj Srila Gurudev Ki. All glories to the assembled devotees. So we'll read a little bit. Actually, it was a long purport, so we'll read a little bit of the purport. And I will read a little bit of the book by Tamal Krishna Maharaj, Servant of the Servant, which talks about how he became a devotee and met Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 10, Chapter 87. We're in the middle of the purport of text 17. So we chanted the verse yesterday, so we just read a little bit of the purport. There's a mark in the book. It says, "What is alive? What is dead?" I don't know what that means. Okay. Yeah, that's the start of a new paragraph. What is alive and what is dead? The bodies and minds of materialistic non-devotees seem to display the symptoms of life, but their appearance is deceptive. Actually, the conditioned soul has little control over his own bodily existence. Against his will, he has to excrete waste, get sick from time to time, and eventually age and die. And in his mind, he unwillingly suffers anger, hankering, and lamentation. Lord Krishna describes this situation as yantra rudhani mayaya in Bhagavad Gita 18:61, riding helplessly as a passenger in a mechanical vehicle. The soul undoubtedly is alive and irrevocably so, but in his ignorance, that inner life is covered and forgotten. In its place, the automaton of the external mind and body carries out the dictates of the modes of nature, which force one to act in a way altogether irrelevant to the dormant needs of the soul, calling out the forgetful prisoners of illusion that Shvetashvatara Upanishad 2.5 urges. Shrinvantu Vishve Amritasya Putra Aye Damani Divyani Tashtuhu. All you sons of immortality, hear, you who once resided in the divine kingdom. So on the one hand, what is normally viewed as living, the material body, is actually a dead machine being manipulated by the modes of nature. And on the other hand, what the materialist condescendingly views as inert matter, meant for exploitation, is in its own essence connected with the living intelligence, vastly more potent than his own. The Vedic civilization recognizes the intelligence behind nature as belonging to demigods who preside over the various elements, and ultimately to the Supreme Lord himself. Matter, after all, cannot act coherently without the impulse and guidance of a living force. As Krishna states in Bhagavad Gita 9:10, Maya dakshena prakriti suyate sa characharam hitunani nakonteya jagad vipari vartate. This material nature, which is one of my energies, is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, producing all moving and non-moving beings. Under its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So it's a long purport. It goes on a few more pages. So I'll put the marker right above where we should start tomorrow. Maybe if I can tell Rasika Shiromani Prabhu that we're still on the purport for tomorrow. And the mark is right where we see. Whoever made the garland just made some mistakes yesterday, so it's all the garland maker's fault.
It's my fault also. I can't take it. Upar? And he cannot see.
I can see. So we'll read a little bit from The Servant of the Servant. It's an autobiography by Tamal Krishna Maharaj about his first years in the movement of Krishna consciousness. It's quite interesting how any devotee first becomes involved in Krishna consciousness. Sometimes there are obstacles, so Tamal Krishna Maharaj had a few obstacles. He was from New York City, and he was a young person at the time that Prabhupada visited New York City. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was a musician. He had a flute, and he liked to play the flute. So one time, he heard about a cosmic love-in at Tompkins Square Park. So he went there. He would sometimes go to different events, especially where the young people, the musicians and the beatniks and the young people were hanging out, and he would play his music and sort of join with other musicians and spontaneously play music. So he happened to go to the park, and he was playing his flute with other musicians and kind of blending in and playing spontaneous melodies. And his eyes were closed, and he was playing the flute, and then all of a sudden they heard a kirtan from the devotees. Now, Prabhupada wasn't there at that time. This was after Prabhupada had visited New York and went on some further destinations. But the New York devotees had started going to Tompkins Square Parks to do kirtan. So the Tamal Krishna Maharaj heard this loud Hare Krishna chanting and drums and cartels. So he and the other musicians kind of thought it was part of this happening, part of the scene. Being a hip musician, you kind of go with the flow. So they started playing music along with the Madranga drum and the cartels. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj, I'll read a little bit of what he writes. I had brought my flute and was improvising music along with the other musicians. We were playing intently, our eyes closed, when suddenly a great vibration was heard throughout the park. It was the Hare Krishna mantra, chanted by the devotees who had come to participate in the festival on the order of their spiritual master. For the rest of the afternoon, their kirtan entirely dominated the festival, and willingly or unwillingly, I was swept up in the chanting for nearly 2 hours. Being unfamiliar with the mantra, I could not make out the exact words. Therefore, sometimes I accompanied this kirtan by playing my flute, while at other times I joined in with the singing, imitating the sounds as best I could, while dancing along with the devotees. Though at the time I could not understand the significance of this event, an informal initiation had taken place. The initiators, Guru and Krishna, had both been present. The spiritual master had been represented by his disciples, who were empowered to chant by his order, and Krishna had been present in the form of his holy names. It was not the first time I had heard of Krishna. When in high school I had been attracted to reading books about Brahmanism and Hinduism, and in college my favorite course was an art history elective on the art and architecture of Indian temples. The character of Krishna had frequently appeared in the numerous wall paintings, bas reliefs, and sculptures of ancient India. To my art history professor, as well as in the books I read, Krishna was merely a mythological hero of a bygone age. But for the devotees who had dedicated their lives to his service, Krishna was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So then, when springtime came, Tamal Krishna decided to move out to California. At that time in San Francisco area, there were a lot of young people congregating and a lot of new things were happening. By the time spring arrived, I had decided to leave New York for the more natural, inviting atmosphere of the West Coast. But I was disappointed to find San Francisco similar to what I had hoped to leave behind in New York. A chance acquaintance led me north to Mendocino County, where a free-thinking bohemian had opened his large wooded farm to the public as an act of peace and love. Anyone could come and live at Morningstar Ranch and do whatever they pleased. Wanting to be alone, I found a secluded place within the woods and made my residence in the hollow of a giant redwood tree. With the cement and harsh steel world far in the distance, I learned to survive without electricity, running water, and all the conveniences afforded by modern civilization. I now turn to nature for all my provisions, adopting the ways of the forest, other inhabitants, the trees, birds, and animals. I forged a close bond with the elements, the clear, cold mountain water that flowed in the brook, and the deep, penetrating warmth of the sun. At night I gazed up to the heavens and beheld the starry firmament. The movements of the planets and stars, each in its own orbit, the changing of the seasons, providing heat, water, heat, and light, all bore testimony of a great master plan. The man-made artificial environment of New York City had hidden this truth. Certainly I thought there is a God whose supreme intelligence has made this wonderful arrangement. Living in such a natural setting, free from so many of the disturbances of city life, my mind became tranquil and contemplative. It It was actually Krishna's arrangement to prepare me for chanting Hare Krishna. And he notes that Prabhupada had visited there before. Srila Prabhupada had visited Morning Star Ranch a month before my arrival, and his presence had left an indelible impression upon the residents. Daily they would hold impromptu kirtans, chanting enthusiastically with whatever instruments were available. By now I was ready, and I would emerge from the forest to join the chanting whenever the kirtans took place. To remain living in the forest seemed a lonely prospect. There was no one to whom I could express my newfound realizations, and how was I to make further advancement. So then he moved to the city of San Francisco. And he had a friend named Mark, and he got a room with this friend named Mark. The room was only $10 a month. The room which I was subtitling for $10 a month is located in the rear of the basement of a large framed house. By selling a local hip newspaper, the Berkeley Bar, once a week, I earned $40 a month, easily enough to maintain myself. So in his room, he was kind of a spiritual seeker, so he put all kind of posters and things to meditate on. Then one day he kept chanting Hare Krishna, which he'd learned at the ranch. Then it was while I was walking through Golden Gate Park one day that I encountered a devotee who had been at the Morning Star Ranch. And it was at his invitation that I visited the temple at Frederick Street for this Sunday Love Feast. And he describes how he went to the temple for the first time. I was eager to reach the meeting, quickly covering the 5 blocks between my residence and the temple. He was only 5 blocks away. Instructed by the devotees, they had a rustic, homemade look, as the devotees had preferred to leave the raw wood unfinished instead of painting it. Shamasundar Prabhu had, I think, helped use the redwood in building the temple. Later he used redwood in the first temple in London also. When I entered, it was like stepping into another world. The very long, rectangular temple room was bathed in a light that seemed especially bright compared with the outside darkness. The air was heavy with incense. At the far end, opposite the door, I saw the deities of Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra high up on the altar. And below them was a deity of Kartama Shahi, the form of Krishna with one hand on his hip and the other holding a flute. The room was filled with young people with their casual, offbeat appearance, easily identifying them as residents of Haight-Ashbury. Then I saw Prabhupada sitting upon a raised dais with an Arabic tapestry behind it. He dominated the assembly by his powerful presence. The meeting had just begun, so I quickly found a place to sit in the middle of the room. Prabhupada began playing his kartals softly in 1-2-3, 1-2-3 rhythm as he chanted the evening prayers to his spiritual master in the disciplic succession, Lord Chaitanya, Radha, and Krishna. Although this was the first time I had seen Prabhupada, I had heard his voice before, on the Happening record album, which Mark and I owned, and I had sung and danced along in accompaniment. Now, as I sat in Srila Prabhupada's personal presence, listening to his rich, sweet voice, accompanied only by the sound of his kartals, I closed my eyes to enter into the mood of his singing. So he describes how Prabhupada led this kirtan, and the devotees, the people in the room, stood up and started to dance. Shishiva Nilamadhava ki. So they came with this really ecstatic kirtan, but Tamal Krishnaraj and his friend Mark, they were also following another spiritual teacher. So they had planned to go only attend the kirtan. I think His Holiness Giriraj Maharaj said that when he first saw Prabhupada in Boston, he missed the lecture, and he only came for the kirtan at the end of the program. So Tamal Krishnaraj and his friend Mark, unfortunately, they only went to the kirtan, Prabhupada's kirtan. Then when everyone was bowing down, they left. And they were following this other spiritual teacher. They were kind of like right-hand man of this other spiritual teacher. So sometimes when we hear about the ways that devotees become devotees, there's some obstacles. Like even Lord Chaitanya was not a devotee at first. He had the pastime of being a Sanskrit teacher, and he would teach logic and various aspects of Vedic knowledge that were not directly Krishna conscious. And even Srila Prabhupada was in the Gandhi movement, and when he first heard Bhaktisiddhanta, it took him a little bit of time before he fully surrendered. There's a saying that a great river like the Ganga starts from its humble beginning. You go to the first place in the Himalayas where the Ganges starts, there's some snow is melting or glaciers are melting, and Ganges starts very humbly, but then it becomes a great river. So there's this principle in the Vedic culture that you don't put too much importance on how a great soul begins in this material world, but where they end up. But it's interesting how when devotees come to Krishna consciousness, there's various obstacles there. So they had this other teacher that was an obstacle at that time. Mark, who had also attended the meeting, signaled to me we had another appointment. We had prearranged to stay only for the kirtan, after which we had to rush in the car to a different spiritual meeting. So they went to this meeting, and this physics professor, who was sort of a spiritualist, he was giving a talk to these people, and when they got to this talk, it was so boring compared to the kirtan. So both Tamal Krishna Maharaj and his friend Mark, they said, we got to go back to the temple. It was too late that night, but they had, I think that was a Wednesday night, and they had meetings at the temple on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. They decided to go on Friday night to the temple again. So then he heard Prabhupada read from the Bhagavatam. He couldn't understand all the Sanskrit words, but he was very impressed with Prabhupada. And he mentioned, I began to attend all the evening lectures at the temple. As I became familiar with the terms Prabhupada used, the whole subject matter became more comprehensible. I purchased a set of Srimad Bhagavatams. Reading them each day confirmed what Prabhupada was speaking in his lectures. In each of his lectures, Prabhupada stressed the importance of avoiding sinful activities, particularly intoxication, reading, illicit sex, and gambling. It was the first time I'd ever heard anyone explain that such behavior would impair spiritual development. Prabhupada was not compromising the truth. He had come to deliver the timeless teaching of the spiritual world as he had heard them from the disciplic succession. So then they were living only 5 blocks from the temple. They were coming quite often. And Prabhupada would sometimes give lectures at outside places. So the Unitarian Church was one place, very liberal Christian church, was one place where Prabhupada would give the lectures. So Tamal Krishna went to a lecture at the Unitarian Church. During the lecture, he decided to ask a question. One doubt had been lingering in my mind. Seeing that Srila Prabhupada was asking for questions, I thought this would be a good opportunity. I raised my hand, and when he nodded in acknowledgement, I stood up and asked, if someone takes the Krishna consciousness but is not completely successful, not perfect, what happens? What will be his fate? Prabhupada nodded his head in understanding my question. See, he seemed pleased with the opportunity to speak more about Krishna. He explained that as eternal spirit souls, we do not die at the time of passing away from our body. Unlike the body, which is only an external covering, consciousness is an actual extension of the soul. Krishna consciousness is our original eternal consciousness, and it can never be lost. Once it is revived, it becomes a permanent asset, whereas in the material world, unless one is 100% successful, his business may fail. But in Krishna consciousness, whatever we do for Krishna is our success. Even 1% done in devotional service is never lost. And one will begin from the point of 2% in his next life. Prabhupada was looking directly at me. Smiling, he said, is that all right? As I later found out, Prabhupada had appreciated my question. It was the same question that Sri Arjuna had placed before the original spiritual master, Lord Sri Krishna. Now, 5,000 years later, Prabhupada had delivered to me the same knowledge Krishna had spoken to Arjuna. Then another kind of test came. They were coming to the Tamal Krishna Maharaj and his friend Mark were coming to the temple regularly. Tamal Krishna Maharaj was single. Mark had been married and had 2 children. And there were a lot of brahmacharis, and it was quite a strict rule for men and women to not associate who were not married. He mentioned that his friend Mark still maintained a friendly relationship with his wife and 2 children. There was one Mataji that was preaching to the new people, and she started preaching to Tamal Krishna Maharaj and the friend Mark. And she was having trouble in her Krishna conscious marriage. So the Mataji was kind of, a little bit too outgoing, and her husband became a little upset that she was preaching to these two new fellows so much. And so some of the devotees started to feel uncomfortable with the situation. As the matter prolonged, the devotees became divided over whether we were actually sincere in being harassed by a loose woman, or whether we were in fact demons inciting her to leave her husband. One evening on an off night when Prabhupada was not giving class, we went to attend darshan at his apartment. But at the door we were refused entry and told that Prabhupada did not want us to come because of our activities. Although we did not know whether or not Srila Prabhupada had personally been involved with the matter, Mark was very disappointed. As far as I could gather, he had innocently befriended the woman only to hear about Krishna consciousness from her. I tried to encourage him by telling him that I had once read that the Guru will test the student to see how sincere he is. A few days later, I became convinced that Prabhupada had indeed been informed of the matter and was not at all pleased. Then they came for a program on Ram Navami. It was the appearance of Lord Ramchandra, and Prabhupada, along with all the devotees, was spending the entire day at the temple observing a fast. When Mark entered along with his wife, two children, and Gargamuni's wife, that's the Mataji was kind of in Maya, the scowl on Prabhupada's face plainly indicated his displeasure. Seeing this, I made it a point to sit far away from Mark to avoid being identified with him. Fortunately, Prabhupada's mood quickly changed. So he started singing Raghupati Raghava Raja Ram Patita Pavana Sita Ram. So at the end of that program on Ram Navami, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, he had brought his set of Bhagavatams, and he writes, I had brought my set of Bhagavatam, which I hoped to have Prabhupada sign at the right moment, just as Srila Prabhupada finished respecting prasadam and had washed his hands. I walked over to the Vyasa son and asked if he would autograph my Bhagavatams. Without a word, he took the first volume in hand and signed. The signing of the Bhagavatams had great significance for me. It was the second personal exchange I'd had with Prabhupada. And I sensed that he had recognized me as the same person who had asked the question the night of the meeting at the Unitarian Church. I felt that my personal relationship with him was becoming established, that I was no longer just a casual member of the audience. I considered the Bhagavatam to be the most valuable book I'd ever read, and Prabhupada's signature made it still more valuable. More than simply signing my book, I felt he was inscribing his name upon my heart, and that he was my guru and I was his disciple. Mark and I were sitting in our small room, and suddenly this is after the temple, if their rented room, I guess. When suddenly it was a loud knock at the door. To our surprise, Gargamuni entered without invitation, obviously in an angry mood. That's the husband of this Mataji. The previous evening, his wife had come to our residence looking for shelter. She complained that Gargamuni had broken her beads and thrown her down the stairs. Because she had nowhere else to go, we had let her spend the night in the front portion of the basement. Gargamuni was very agitated. He explained that to associate with another's wife was directly against the scriptures and an offense to Krishna. He stated that the Vedas allow one who steals the wife of another man to be killed. He had always maintained his wife working honestly, and his only interest was to serve his spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada. Why were we giving trouble to him and to ourselves as well? Frankly, he said his wife was not worth it. Why should we get entangled with such a woman? We should take up Krishna consciousness seriously. Mark explained to Gargamuni that there had been no intimate exchange between Gargamuni's wife and himself. Actually, all we wanted was to become devotees. The whole matter had gotten out of hand. Then don't have any more to do with her, was Gargamuni's reply. And with this, he walked out. Later, I found that Gargamuni had a knife in his pocket, and he had intended to attack Mark. Instead, however, he had ended up preaching to us. And his words had effect. Mark decided that without further delay, we should join the temple. I was a little taken aback by surprise. True, I had thought in terms of becoming Krishna conscious, but not this suddenly. When he saw my hesitation, he asked, what was the use of putting off what I intended to do eventually anyway? We both laughed. Within minutes, we had packed all our belongings in duffel bags and had left the room to Gargamuni's wife, who had been hiding from her husband in the front of the basement. Wow. We walked down Frederick Street to the temple, but the devotees did not welcome us in. Due to the incident involving Gargamuni's wife, we were considered mischievous persons, permitted to visit the temple but not to live there. The brahmacharis gave their judgment in unison, absolutely not. So this is a really heavy test. We had made the decision to surrender our lives, and yet we had not been accepted. We wondered what the meaning of this was and what to do next. In the morning, we attended the temple as usual. Then after breakfast was shot, one of the brahmacharis approached us and explained that the devotee to discuss our joining and reconsidered we could move into the temple after all. So they ended up moving into the temple and becoming full-time devotees. So quite early on, Tamal Krishnaraj met Jayananda, who was supporting the temple at that time. The first time I saw Jayananda Prabhu, he was chanting his morning japa. The intensity with which he rocked back and forth chanting his beads startled me. When I was later informed that he alone was supporting the entire temple, I immediately admired and respected such a sober personality. While the other brahmachari spent the day in temple activities, Jayananda drove his taxi cab, earning money to pay the rent, food, and other bills. But he was present every morning and evening at all of the programs. I especially enjoyed his classes, describing the passengers he serviced in his taxi cab. Jayananda would speak with great compassion, lamenting their suffering condition. I was impressed that one could maintain a connection with the outside world and still be so absorbed in Krishna consciousness. Joining the temple also meant shaving our locks of hair. Hearing of the benefits of a clean-shaven head had not been enough to make the idea appealing to me. Although I knew it was hygienic and made one less body conscious, I was a little attached to keeping my hair. However, Mark was fearless. The very first day, he sat in the kitchen on a chair and ordered that his head would be shaved. Seeing Mark's sincerity dispelled all of Gargamuni's misgivings about us. Among the devotees, Garga Muni was considered a shrewd businessman, but as a rare act of charity, he presented Mark and me each with a set of first-class japa beads from his store. Seeing 2 new brahmacharis brought gladness to everyone's heart. So Garga Muni he's the brother of Brahmananda, and he was quite business-oriented. He ended up starting an incense business later. Shri Shiva Nilamadava Ki. So, for those that have not read the book, there's a lot of personal stories and realizations. So, usually there's some test when we come to Krishna consciousness. And Mark actually became Vishnu Jan Swami. And Tamal Krishnaraj and he were good friends before they joined Krishna consciousness. Then later they served together in the Radha Damodar party and in other situations. So it's not in the book, but I heard a story that Vishnu Jan Swami was also living at this ranch, and the first time that Tamal Krishnaraj and he met, I assume the story is true, but his devotees say this story that Tamal Krishnaraj played the flute, and he was living in a tree house. So one day he was playing his flute, and he heard, I think, a guitar. And so one of the two went where the other sound was coming from. So they met by hearing each other's sound vibration. Then they became friends at the ranch. Then they both moved to San Francisco. And they both started going to the temple. And then this incident happened where the Mataji was in Maya, was preaching to these 2 guys, but she was wanting to leave her husband and probably leave Krishna consciousness. So she begged one night if she could sleep on the couch in their basement apartment. And as soon as this happened, the temple became an uproar. Oh, the Mataji, he's probably with those 2 new boys. So it was a very contentious situation. But because they were sincere, and the Mataji wasn't, she ended up leaving Krishna consciousness, as far as I know, and they became wonderful devotees. So, but there's obstacles. New people that come may have some obstacles, but if they're sincere and the devotees, ultimately the devotees decided to give them a chance. So, to some extent, Iskcon is quite a liberal movement. We give many people a chance, and sometimes people do well, sometimes they have problems, but, we try to give people a chance and encourage them. Anybody have any comments or questions? Thank you very much. Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki. Disappearance Day of Tamal Krishna Maharaj Ki Jai. How did what? It's a long story, but I first met Tamal Krishna Maharaj by a Back to Godhead magazine. I was in El Salvador, and a devotee mailed me the magazine. It was 1 year after Prabhupada left the planet, and there was an interview with Prabhupada's personal secretary to Tamal Krishna Maharaj. I read about him first. And he was, in this interview, you could tell that he loved Prabhupada and wanted to, he said it was so wonderful to serve Prabhupada personally. And when I heard about Krishna consciousness, I never got to meet Prabhupada, but I read about Tamal Krishna Maharaj. So then, a long story, I started visiting the Los Angeles temple, and the same devotee that sent me the Back to Godhead would mail it to me. She was from Miami temple. So I got back to America. She would mail it to me in Los Angeles. I was staying with my parents. So every month the magazine would come. It used to come out once a month. Now it comes out every 2 months. So one month it didn't come. I was trying to avoid the temple because the devotees would sometimes criticize other gurus, and I was following a different spiritual master from India. So I got tired of the devotees attacking my guru. So I thought, it's nice this Mataji is sending me the Back to Godhead so I can kind of be Krishna conscious without going to the temple. But 1 month the Back to Godhead didn't come. It was coming quite regularly, so then I decided to go to the temple to get buy the Back to Godhead at the temple gift shop in L.A. So I went to the temple, and the gift shop, they're very nice, and they said, you know, one of our swamis is giving the Sunday feast lecture today. And they said he was a personal secretary of Prabhupada, Tamal Krishna Goswami. So I'd read about him about a year earlier, or 6 months earlier, I forget. And so I thought, So I decided to stay for the Sunday feast. And then he gave this nice lecture about Krishna being Bhagavan, having all 6 opulences, that no human being has all the 6 opulences. And he seemed very reasonable. So in the lecture, during the question and answers, I asked, what should you do if someone criticizes a spiritual master or spiritual teacher? He quoted from the Bhagavatam that you should either leave or commit suicide or convince the person that they're wrong to criticize. So I thought he's very reasonable. So as he was leaving the lecture, he had a servant. So I asked Tamal Krishna Maharaj, could I see you and talk privately? So he said, you can, just make an appointment with my servant. So I made an appointment. So I was planning to talk to him, and he seemed very reasonable and very mature and intelligent, and so I thought I would ask him why I have to criticize my teacher to come to Krishna consciousness. So that's why I was planning to talk to him. So for 3 days he was there, and every day I was supposed to see him at 1 o'clock or some time. Every day I'd come, and they'd say, oh, Maharaj is too busy, we'll see you tomorrow. So after 3 days, I actually was staying in the temple at that time, waiting to talk to him. And I learned how to put a dhoti on and help in the kitchen and so forth. And then one of the devotees said that Maharaj is leaving tomorrow. Right after he's giving Bhagavatam class one more time, and he's going straight from the temple to a car for the airport. So I said, which Maharaj are you talking about? Because there were various Maharajas there. It was a big meeting of Iskcon leaders at that time also. So there was a number of tea. And all this blasphemy and stuff happened. So the class was about you should not tolerate blasphemy. If someone said something about your guru that was bad, you weren't supposed to tolerate it. So anyway, because the class was about that, at the end of the class I said, some devotees, I've been following a spiritual path and I became a vegetarian. I learned about the Bhagavad Gita. That's how I learned about Krishna consciousness. So I just don't feel like hearing bad things said about my spiritual teacher. So it was not that he really wanted to talk to me, but it wasn't the time for that question. Because just before I asked the question, it was about 1 year and a half, a little longer than 1 year after Prabhupada left the planet. And he was ending his lecture saying we should all cooperate, preach, distribute books, do everything that Prabhupada wanted. So he's ending the lecture on a very upbeat way, inspiring the devotees. So when I asked my question about some guru, and he just didn't want to deal with it. So he said, I don't want to hear about your so-called guru. I said, but sir. He said, no buts. It's not the time. And he said, one more word out of you and you're out of this temple. So I decided I couldn't say anything. And in the lecture he said, before I asked my question, because the purport was about blasphemy, in his lecture he said, you should never accept blasphemy, and if someone would have blasphemed Srila Prabhupada, we would throw him out of the temple. So it's very serious. So he said all this, so I thought, everyone knows I'm a TM teacher and I follow this guru, and everybody knew who I was. So I thought, if I don't say something in defense of my spiritual teacher, then I'm not acting properly. So then he said, not another word out of you. So I decided to make a show of defiance. So I was at the back of the LA temple, and it was a full several hundred devotees. So I took a few steps kind of towards Vyasa-san. And I was nervous, like, now I have Parkinson's, that's why I shake, but I was shaking with out of fear because Tamal Krishna was so heavy. I was like, but I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do, and I realized he's doing what he's supposed to do also, so I didn't blame him. So I took a few steps, and some Kshatriya-type devotees, they grabbed me. One of them held my shoulders, and the other held my ankles. There's a side door on the LA temple. There's an alleyway on the alleyway? There's a side door. So they took me out the side door and threw me on the steps. And as I'm leaving, Tamal Krishna says, get that rascal out of here. So I'd come on my mother's bicycle before that. So I went to the apartment where I was staying, and I was wearing a dhoti, so I changed into my non-devotee clothes. And I got on my mother's bicycle and I rode home. It was about 10 miles away. And I was thinking, I wonder what happened. Why did it all happen like that? I didn't disrespect Tamal Krishna Maharaj, but I felt very unhappy with the way it turned out. And then about 2 or 3 days after I got back home to my parents' house, the Back to Godhead magazine I've been waiting for actually came late. And with the magazine there was an audio tape. And there was a letter with the magazine. She would also, this Mataji would send me prasadam also. There's some prasadam and the tape, and she wrote in a letter with the package, and she said, I know you're into some kind of meditation or yoga, and we have a tape library at our Miami temple. So I found a tape by one of our sannyasi swamis, and maybe this will help you. So I looked at the tape. It was from the Dallas tape ministry of Tamal Krishna. And in the tape he was talking to two meditation teachers that were in the same movement that I was in. And he was really nice to them, and he answered all their questions. So I realized through the tape he was talking to me. So he had said, I would talk to you. So he answered, and he told them, just add Krishna consciousness to your life, and if the Krishna consciousness is better, then you can always follow Krishna consciousness. And if what you're doing is better, then you can keep doing that. So then I had his address in Dallas, so I wrote him a long letter and apologized, and through his secretary, he said you can always, he had invited me to try Krishna consciousness for 1 month. And he said, if Krishna consciousness is better than what you're doing, then just continue. If it's not, you haven't lost anything. We won't charge you 1 penny. And in those days, the meditation movement I was following would charge for various seminars and retreats and instruction and meditation. So about 1.5 years later, I was able to go to Dallas, but some devotees had seen me in LA. When they saw me in Dallas, look at that guy, that troublemaker's here again. And then Radhanath Swami was there when I got thrown out in LA Temple. He was a brahmachari, he wasn't a Swami then, I think. They had these big meetings in LA, so a lot of devotees were there. And Radhanath Swami had preached to me a little bit, but I forgot him because a lot of devotees preached to me. But I've been serving Tamal Krishna Maharaj in Cambridge, England, and Radhanath Swami visited him. And it was a 2-story house, so I was in the upper story, so I didn't hardly even see Radhanath Swami. But I believe that they must have talked about this incident, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj thought it was kind of funny that this guy that got thrown out of the temple ended up becoming a devotee. So I just speculating that Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, remember that guy that got thrown out of the temple when I was speaking in LA? He said, yeah, I remember that. Do you know where he is right now? No, I don't. He's upstairs in this house. So Radhanath Swami came, said, I saw you get thrown out of the temple. I felt so bad. And he said, I didn't think you did the wrong thing to do. So, what's that? What about Dallas? Yeah, I got initiated in Dallas. Grantaraj. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki.